Hi, I'm Doug Draper with Acme Distribution and the Denver Transportation Club, and I'm pleased to present our series Supply Chain Logistics, the Storytellers. The series is brought to you by CAP Logistics. CAP Logistics are experts in offering you customized transportation and logistics solutions. So please visit caplogistics.com today. All right, so today's topic would be related to satellite imagery and logistics thereof. And I'm excited to have our guest today, Deke Young. He's with DigitalGlobe. Deke, thanks for joining us.
Sure, it's great to be here.
So your role over at DigitalGlobe is the Director of Product Management, and we can get into exactly what that means here in a few minutes. But let's definitely have our audience learn a little bit about yourself, kind of how you got into this industry. Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I started out my career working for the U.S. Geological Survey and doing geologic mapping. So really my passion is in creating maps. And actually the first maps that I used were old paper maps on family vacations, and my mom would hand me a map and say, tell us how to get where we're going. And I'd sit there in the front seat and track our progress.
Yeah.
So I've loved maps ever since I was a little kid, and maps for transportation and logistics, just of family vacations, was really where I got my start.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. So tell us about your role as product manager.
So as a product manager, my job is to look at how our customers are using our products out in the marketplace and make sure that our products are meeting their needs, and then also making sure that our products are being enhanced to meet the needs that we're going to have in the future. So our product line includes imagery collected by satellites that are circling the globe 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, collecting imagery, and we can use those images as products in and of themselves, or we can derive information from those products and sell the information we're extracting from them.
Gotcha. Yeah, interesting. So let's take a step back a little bit and let's talk about the history of satellite imagery, right? Satellites haven't been around forever, and kind of the evolution of how this got to be, kind of an industry in and of itself. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So satellites have really been in space and collecting imagery for 50 or 60 years, and really evolved out of big government programs back when they first were being launched. And in the early 90s, the US government in particular made the technology commercializable, if that's really a word.
I like it.
All
Keep
right.
going.
I'll make up words during this if I need to. And so what that meant is that now commercial companies could start building their own technology and putting it in space. So a lot of that industry started here in Colorado, because Colorado is a hub for space and mapping type industries. So two companies in Colorado launched satellites in the late 90s and started these more targeted missions. So at that point, with just a handful of satellites in space, you really could only map on a regular basis, like individual cities or individual oil fields in the commercial marketplaces. Certainly there's intelligence and defense activities as well that are happening, but a lot of those are distribution and logistics related as well, in terms of how do you move people and supplies around through areas of the world that we don't have good logistical support in.
Right.
So anyway, those satellites have evolved today to be large constellations of multiple satellites, and now we can do mapping missions and map the entire globe on a regular, repeatable basis.
Right. So who owns the satellite? Right. Because it's like, here's this image machine, if you will. That's a great word too. Up in the sky. So who owns it? Who services it? And who's responsible if something happens or it goes down?
Okay. So we own the satellites. So DigitalGlobe owns the satellites. They are very, very high performance machines, and they're in space. So when something goes wrong, we don't have the ability to fix them. The broader company that I work for is called Maxar Technologies, and one branch of Maxar is working on space-based repair strategies. The satellites that are in space today are not field repairable, but that is certainly something that we're considering in the next 2 decades. And these are really long programs. We're working on our next constellation of satellites that we're going to launch, and they'll start launching in 2021, and they'll be in service, that first fleet, for at least 15 years. So part of my day-to-day activities right now is planning what we're going to have in space for really almost the next 2 decades.
Wow, that's crazy. You said constellation, so is it a cluster that's moving around? Let me ask my question differently. How many satellites do you have that you own or up in space right now?
So right now we have 4 that are operational.
And of those 4, are they in clusters of 4? Are there other satellites that have gone down that are in that group?
Yeah, so we've lost a number of satellites. So they have a mission life, right?
Yeah.
And we manage them to that mission life, and some go longer than their mission life, and some are shorter than their mission life. Having a constellation gives us the ability to recover when something malfunctions on one of them.
Gotcha.
So they're not all in a cluster, but they are in planned orbits. So to get really technical, we're in what's called a sun-synchronous epipolar orbit, which basically means that our satellites are going around the poles, and as they do that, they're sort of following the sun, right? So we're usually somewhere between like 11:30 and 1:30 during the day, and our satellites are going around and around and around, and we're just sort of following that 11:30 to 1:30 band of sunlight.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's great for us because shadows tend to be much lower angle, right? And we also can minimize clouds. So in the afternoons, we tend to see cloudier conditions. So clouds are the hardest thing that we really have to deal with.
Yeah, I wouldn't even thought of that, but it makes complete sense. 11:30 and 1:30.
Yep.
So before we jump into kind of the logistics aspect of it, like what are some other applications? You know, in my mind, mission, it had a military background. So who are some of your other customers, or what other type of applications are there with the imagery?
Right. So we divide the business into 3 customer segments. We have the U.S. government, we have international defense and intelligence, and we have commercial. And so I am part of the commercial team, and we have customer segments that are broken out by technology. And so those could be big mapping internet providers in the U.S. and other countries around the world. We have oil and gas, we have mining, we have big NGO or global development organizations, environmental. So we span a pretty broad spectrum of use cases. So our products are built to add value to a large horizontal group of customers, and then we have partners out there in the marketplace that will then build value on top of our products for specific vertical industries.
Gotcha.
And transportation and logistics fits in our technology portfolio.
Gotcha. So of those 3, you talked about the military, defense, international applications, and commercial. Is any one of those growing faster than the other, or is there new applications like trucking or transportation companies? Talk about those 3 different segments and which ones are growing faster. And
yeah, so they all have, as a product manager, we're responsible for looking at the marketplace and how big those markets are and how fast those markets are growing. I can't talk specifically about the U.S. government or the ID&I businesses because I don't work in those spaces on a day-to-day basis. But the commercial element is growing. I mean, if you just think of mapping applications on the phone, right, or mapping applications in particular with autonomous vehicles or last mile delivery using drones. I mean, there's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of creative thinking. There's a lot of opportunities to increase the level of service to customers and also reduce the cost to the providers. So we look at the commercial marketplace and see a foundation that needs to be built using things like our satellites to enable the technologies that are coming in the next few years or next few decades.
Yeah, I could definitely see the commercial side just blowing up, with people wanting instant access to everything on their phones, not only where they are or where they're going or where did I ski or where did I mountain bike or whatever it may be.
All those things are part of the ecosystem that we're working in.
Gotcha.
But things that are innovating today, I mean, just the logistics of like oil and gas development. I mean, being in Colorado, we see that all over Colorado, and there's new roads going in and new networks and neighbors complaining about trucks, and all of that can be mapped using a variety of technologies, but all of those technologies require a really accurate base map.
Right.
And that's where we come in, is having a really accurate base map that all those other technologies can be built on top of.
Right.
Because if you don't have that, then you're not accurate in what you're doing.
Right, right. So that's a good example with the oil and gas, specifically here in Colorado. So who would purchase that, right? So am I a Halliburton or a gas company that needs that data, or is it more of a municipality that's trying to work with the private sector? So use that as an example of how your technology would work and who's actually buying it or consuming it.
Yeah, so the answer is yes to all of that. And it really depends on, there's all sorts of different imagery sources out there. So the US government will fly the entire United States with aerial imaging platforms every 3 years. So someone in Colorado could be building their business workflows on a 3-year refresh from the US government. DigitalGlobe offers a 1-year refresh of the entire US. So if you need something more frequent than a 3-year refresh, you could come to DigitalGlobe and buy a 1-year refresh. But our satellites can be tasked. So if you have a very high value activity going on, you could ask DigitalGlobe to use its satellites to image that once a quarter, once a month, once a week, so that you can track what's going on in those assets. And like I said earlier, like our products are very horizontal, so they're bought by all sorts of different users and industries, but state and local government is definitely one of our targets. We see more growth there internationally, but we do have users through partner platforms using our imagery.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so a refresh, explain that a little bit more when you say it's 3 year or 1 year. That's basically saying, hey, I've been working at this spot. I need you to take a picture of it.
Exactly.
As frequently as possible.
Yeah, I mean, as frequently. I mean, we're happy to image it as often as we can, but our products have costs, and our users are working within constrained budgets. So we usually try and find the right balance of what they're trying to do. We have customers that on a regular basis count cars in parking lots, right, to try and understand month to month or year over year same store sales, because they can compare how many cars are in the parking lot for a period of time and then make predictions on how well those businesses are doing.
And that's an actual application right now?
That is an actual application right now.
So they're just counting and saying, all right, this store
yes.
has X number of shoppers on an annual
exactly.
basis.
And you could do that, one, if you're trying to predict the financial outcomes that those stores might have, but you also might want to watch your competition, right? Like you as a business know the volume of business that you're doing, but you don't have access to the counts or the transactions that are happening at your customers' businesses. And so satellite imagery can be a way to look at how you might be doing against the competition, because if you count the cars in your parking lot versus the cars in your competition's parking lot, you might understand how you're growing versus them.
That's pretty interesting. Never would have thought of that.
Yeah, we get to solve some really, really unique problems.
That's interesting. So we had talked a little bit beforehand about the logistics of disaster recovery and different projects that you've done. So it was a great example of how on a commercial segment you can learn how many people are shopping at my store and what do I need to do because my competitors have more cars. Talk about some of the applications you have with disaster recovery and how you've worked with FEMA and other entities like that to help.
Yeah, so our satellites really perform well in places that have experienced some sort of disruption, right? Because there are relatively good maps around the world that companies can use to drive their businesses. But when something happens, like a hurricane or a wildfire, a tornado, an earthquake, and those maps get disrupted, bridges are down, floods have occurred, buildings are burned, our satellites are very often the first imagery that can be taken that's already built into workflows. Like anybody can launch a drone and image something, but they tend to be very localized, and the data coming off of them is not integrated into the systems and processes that are being used by first responders. They're getting there, and there's certainly a lot of presence there. But a satellite imager can cover hundreds of square kilometers in a single image and really get a good regional picture of what's happened. And our satellites are such high quality that they can actually see a lot of the details too. So we can very quickly help first responders respond and start setting up aid and distribution logistics. But we also help companies like refactor their supply chain and distribution and logistics. Like when you think about some of the tornadoes that have hit Houston or New Orleans, like we're talking disruption of supply chains for, days or weeks sometimes.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Were you involved 5 years or so with the floods up in the Fort Collins area?
Yep.
And I know that's relevant to Colorado. Can you dive in a little bit deeper about some of the technology that was used to help out?
Absolutely. So I've been talking primarily about our satellite imaging capabilities, but our satellite imagery can be used to create elevation models, so really, really detailed elevation models. It can be used to do like automated water extraction, so we can see where standing water exists. It can be used to automatically extract displaced bridges, roads that have been washed out. We can do that in two ways. We can use machine learning or artificial intelligence, but we also use crowdsourcing. So we'll put an image out on the internet and ask the crowd, just like people on the internet, like you, can come and look at that image. And if you see a bridge that's been taken out, there's a little bridge icon. You push that. And if you get enough people that say this bridge is out, then we develop a confidence scale and say, hey, this bridge is out. And a lot of time in disasters, people want to help, right?
Right.
People will send, $5 through some sort of donation platform, but you can also actually get on and use our imagery and help create data while you're observing the actual results on the ground that will be used by first responders.
So how would I do that if it's me, I want to help out in a situation?
Right.
Do I go to your website? How do I access that image?
So you can come to our website. With really large disasters where lives are at stake and first responder activity is important. Part of DigitalGlobe's mission is to provide support in these kind of things. So we actually have an open data program, and we will actually publish this data for use by first responders and aid agencies. It's accessible to the people listening to this radio broadcast right now. It's not licensed to be commercially used, but if you see the data and realize that the data might provide value to your business, we have a way to license that data. But the data is out there and available for most large disasters for people to start using to get a sense of the disaster. And many of these aid organizations will then start to publish it in ways that the public can access it for crowdsourcing.
Interesting. So in the disaster we were been discussing, I always like to know who's paying for that, right? So all of a sudden there's a storm coming, and within 72 hours there's a disaster, and people want access to your imagery so we can save lives and help other people. Who pays for that? Are you just saying, hey, we'll just make it available and we'll send you a bill later? Or, it seems kind of a silly question, but I'm always curious.
Well, for the open data program, we're not charging for that for use by first responders. We've had a lot of use recently for both hurricanes and wildfires. So in that case, the data is freely available, but the first responder community is paying for the technology and the analysis and all of the products that are being derived for it. If a business wants to use the imagery, then they're using whatever funds that they have. So, an insurance company might be using a budget that's set aside to evaluate a disaster, right? But if you're looking at roofs that have been damaged in a hurricane, and you have to send 50 people into the field, there's a cost to that.
Sure.
Right? They're paying for that. But if you only need to send 40 people into the field because a satellite image identified 50% of the roofs that have been damaged, so you're paying for it, but you're paying for it with money that you've saved somewhere else.
Got it.
So a lot of our value proposition in these kind of things is being able to save money somewhere in your operational environment. So our business case usually plays out that the company is actually saving money when they buy imagery from us.
Huh. That's pretty interesting. What other type of applications? You talked about the parking lot. You just talked about insurance companies on the commercial side. What other type of applications that the listeners may not even be thinking like, oh, that's pretty cool?
Yeah, so certainly like route planning. So a big part of understanding fuel consumption and vehicle access is what type of elevation grades do you need to traverse, right? So as new roads are being built or roads that are being changed, our satellite imagery can be used to create elevation profiles, right? So especially as we start thinking about autonomous vehicles and those vehicles really planning for themselves,
right,
and understanding like when they're going to need fuel next, right? Because if you're not driving the car, you're not paying attention to some gas gauge.
Sure.
So the car needs to know what type of elevation it's going to be driving around so it can plan its next fuel stop. We are really interested in doing automated extraction of road markings. So, all the arrows and crosswalks that are painted on the roads, we can extract those with machine learning and build a base map that becomes the foundation for autonomous vehicles to start making decisions that it needs to make in the next minute or the next 3 minutes, right? So we're not necessarily building to be the technology that's right in the car, but we're building the technology that lets the car make a decision with everything that's going on around it.
Yeah, I would not have thought about the elevation gain as simple of an analogy that is, because you're right. You start heading up to the hills or something, and if nobody's watching the gauge, you don't want it to.
You need to know.
Yeah,
right.
you need to know what you need to know.
Like so, I mean, we could talk about this for like hours, right?
Well, you did win an award, right, for the most inquisitive person in your company?
I did, yeah. So last year at one of our company events, I was recognized for being the most curious person. So
there you go.
And that definitely rang true because I am just very curious about how our customers use our products and what they do with them and how they add value to their companies.
Yeah. Well, it's great talking with you because you're passionate about it. The people on the radio that are passionate about it get engaged, and you certainly are with your business. So let's flip when we have just a couple more minutes. Kind of what do you think satellite imagery technology looks like? You said you're planning decades down the road, but let's just keep it 5 or 10 years. Like, what cool stuff is going to be happening because of the technology and the services that your company is going to bring to the table? Paint a picture 5 years out.
Yeah. So for me, satellite imagery is just one piece of the broader puzzle there. So our images are not unlike an image taken on the phone, right? So, I mean, our phones are almost more cameras with phones attached to them than they are phones with cameras attached to them. Mm-hmm. But it's all the things that have grown up around that, right? So there's things, when I think about the future, are going to be cloud computing. It's going to be machine learning and feature detection and automated extraction of information. It's going to be the Internet of Things. It's going to be IT security. Mm-hmm. Like, how do we guarantee that this image has not changed somehow in the supply chain? So things like blockchain come into that. I mean, there's a lot of really, really interesting technologies on the ground that are going to exploit the capabilities that we have in space. So space, what's going to happen in the next 10 years in space will just increase the supply of imagery, but we're already at the tipping point right now where we don't have enough people to look at all of the imagery that we're collecting. So the investments are very heavy in the machine learning so that we can find out which images are meaningful and then take action on those images.
Oh, okay.
So if I image your house and your house hasn't changed at all, so what? Right? But if I image your house and you've added a deck or added a swimming pool or somehow changed your driveway, like, that's interesting. And so if I have those two images, it would take me time to look at them both and compare them. But if I have a machine that can look at that and make that decision for me, I know which image to look like. And then there's to do that for 165 million square kilometers around the world, right? And you've got a pretty big problem in front of you.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting stuff. So.
Actually, one thing I didn't talk about is we're also now starting to do this over the oceans. So we're doing ship and maritime transportation and logistics. And I actually think that's a real interesting spot as the oceans become more valuable.
Nice. Well, like you said, we could probably sit here for hours and talk about it because it certainly is an interesting topic. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. And we'll certainly have to have you on again to kind of figure out what the next level is.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate Network, Supply Chain Logistics, the Storytellers. And we've had a wonderful one today. So, Deke, thank you so much.
Thank you.